Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another session of the SmartCom Summit Winter Series with the CPaaS Acceleration Alliance. We're talking about the 2023 trends for CPaaS today. Kevin and I have as a very special guest Raul Castanon of S&P Global Market Intelligence, who has recently released some very interesting market figures and trends that we're talking about here today. So we talk a bit about the history and evolution of CPaaS because nobody knows what CPaaS means anymore. The forecast of this total market and where things are going, key use cases, and of course, we'll address the role of the telco in all of this. So welcome, Raul. Great to have you here back.
Thank you.
For the few people out there that don't know you yet, can you do a really quick introduction of yourself and the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, thank you. So I have been with S&P for almost 10 years, out of which about 8 I have been doing analysis on the CPaaS market. That's been my main focus area. I also cover, broadly speaking, business communications. And before that, I was most of my professional career with a company that was eventually acquired by Mavenir, also working with telcos and telco infrastructure.
Great. And Kevin, real quick, we all know you, of course, but CPaaS Acceleration Alliance, how are things going?
They're going great. It's been great partnering up with the SmartCom Summit. And I don't know, we've got 20, 30 sessions that we've recorded now. And so it's great to have Raul here as another great guest, and look forward to learning a little bit more about the back end data that's driving a lot of the market.
Great. Let's start with that word CPaaS, right? Because there's a lot of talk about CPaaS. There's a hype, and everybody has CPaaS and is CPaaS these days. But I find it sometimes a bit confusing. And Raul, I'd like to ask you to explain to us how you look at CPaaS, and also maybe a bit of take us back to some of the history. Where did it start? And so people talk about CPaaS 1.0, 2.0, 2.5. Maybe, and I'll put this here, this little slide that you prepared up on the screen, and maybe you can explain what we're looking at here.
Yeah, thank you. So the term CPaaS, as you pointed out, it's really used very loosely, and between technology vendors and industry analysts, I think we're all guilty of using it in that way. The way we look at this at S&P is mainly from the perspective of the role that programmable communications have in a business. So from that perspective, if you think about communications-enabled processes and workflows, the background for CPaaS really goes back way, 20 and plus years. In the industry, mostly we have an agreement in terms of the different milestones where the emergence of the digital native companies, and think about the companies like Airbnb, Uber, WhatsApp, and this is around 2008, 2009. Coupled with the technologies that enable these companies, thinking about the initial CPaaS pioneers like Twilio, Nexmo, Infobip, that could be where we place the origins of CPaaS. And then for about 10, 12 years, it was this revolution with the digital native companies, a tremendous growth that they show. That could be what we typically refer to as the first stage for CPaaS. Technically, this is where we place mainly CPaaS as an interface, as a layer that enables these companies to make use of the PSTN. So what we have seen in more recent years is that this extended more broadly, and what we typically refer to as CPaaS 2.0, together with the advent of IP-based communications, where we see more of a mainstreaming of this digital transformation. So this could probably lead us to where we are right now, which I think is a very interesting stage right now, where we see those initial players, the standalone CPaaS, they are now more and more competing with technology vendors on the customer experience side, which are incorporating communications into their workflows and capabilities. A very interesting subset, though, are the cloud infrastructure providers and the communication service providers. They have been part of CPaaS from the very beginning, mostly remaining kind of behind the scenes, but now we see them more and more step into the forefront and more directly competing with the standalone CPaaS vendors. So it's a very dynamic space, very competitive. It's also growing tremendously. So from my perspective, there's still a lot of room to grow for all of these players.
Yeah, it's interesting to see these last couple of years that a number of the CPaaS players have been acquired by the larger network and infrastructure guys, right? Like Mavenir and Cisco, Ericsson, all stepped into this space. Microsoft doing various things since a few years, also with the telcos. So if we sort of then look at where this is going, and let's first look at let's say, a market forecast. We all have heard numbers for a long time, how this market is growing to dozens, tens of billions of dollars, etc. Can you try to explain that a little bit and enlighten us with your research and your insights there, and try to make sense of it, basically?
Yeah. So this is our CPaaS forecast for the global market through 2026. It is a bottom-up forecast comprising 79 vendors, including the largest CPaaS vendors. So we project that the market will grow at a compounded annual growth rate of 21.1% in this period of time. So one thing to clarify is that this is our projection for this subset of vendors. So we do think it's representative of the industry. However, it's not the total addressable market. But it's notable that we're pointing out the double-digit growth rate, which is notable. It's a very attractive industry to be in. And within the cloud communication space, if you include, for example, contact center unified communications, this is probably the fastest growing subsegment. So, like I said, that makes it a very attractive space to be in. And you mentioned the different players, including cloud infrastructure providers, telcos, that could add even more to what we're showing here. My estimate is that the addressable market is probably even significantly much larger once we aggregate those factors.
That's amazing. Kevin, from your point of view, right, from the Alliance, the CPaaS Acceleration Alliance, how does this resonate and what does this mean?
Well, I think it's interesting because there's two angles to this. I think one is as Raul's data is showing, with the current core players, we've got significant growth taking place. And I think, one of the conversations we want to have here, what are the use cases driving that? But from the Alliance perspective, I noticed on your previous slide that you have Tata Communications Digo as a brand that you're tracking now, right? And so there is a CSP that I think is probably representative of a number of other carriers. I know that Deutsche Telekom, and many others are now launching major CPaaS services. And so I think to Raul's point, if those aren't in the 79, then there's even more upside in those numbers that Raul's showing. So that's super exciting. But I think at the Alliance, what we're trying to do is tie that back to the commercial impact. So I'm really curious, Raul, what use cases are you seeing that are really driving the growth here in over the next 2 or 3 years to such a dramatic level?
Yeah, so there's different ways of looking at this. We look mainly at the use cases, focusing on the customer and employee experiences, where you may have both the application to person and person to person use cases. The bulk of these will be the transactional interactions, where you may get, for example, in the case of employee experiences, notifications from Oracle system, updates from Salesforce, triggering an activity. And on the customer side, that could be the notification you get when your Uber driver has arrived, or your Ship-it order is on its way, and so on. So these are typically transactional, that largely tend to be SMS based, but they can also be through a mobile application or voice and so on. And that will be the bulk of use cases. I think we're seeing more and more. And we see these where as the use cases where the volume of communications will go. There are other interesting subsets, however, embedded communications within business applications, both again for the customer and employee experience. If you see some of the recent announcements from companies like Microsoft, Google, Soho, and so on, they're more and more talking about embedding unified communications or conferencing within the business applications, so that they are more in line with the workflows, rather than having employees or customers rely on different separate applications and jumping between one and the other. So that's another very interesting use case. I do think that we will see some of the traffic that we may have seen before in the contact center unified communication space go to the embedded communications. More than anything, though, I think it will expand the market. That's another use case. And then within the application to person, there's a lot of potential, for example, for embedded communications within devices for IoT use cases. So that's a lot right there. I don't know what your thoughts are, Kevin.
Yeah. Those are all key. I think it was interesting. Last week we hosted one of our CPaaS showcases, and we had 4 different participants that were competing in the challenge, and 2 of them were omni-channel. So it was interesting that they were showing like Apple Business messaging. They were showing WhatsApp as new channels, which I think are really key. We also had video. There was a video CPaaS player, and they were plugging video into all sorts of commercial use cases. They talked about one with an ambulance, where they had cameras throughout the ambulance so that the doctors could actually view the patient on the way to the hospital, which I thought was a brilliant use. And that's all driven by video APIs off of their CPaaS platform. And yet, people like to say voice is dead, but now with sentiment analysis and different things, I think that voice has a really interesting role to play still as well. So, I think we're seeing some commercially viable options through some of our members that are also driving very, very interesting use cases.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by if you put these two things together, right? The forecast, the CPaaS forecast that you just presented, right? That's based on the 97, I think, companies that you're tracking, more bottom up. And then thinking about all the new use cases, right? The old CPaaS is basically it's messaging, a lot of messaging and more messaging and 2FA and a bit of voice, right? That was what CPaaS, a lot of people think about when they hear CPaaS. But when you look at the showcases, the challenges that we do with the Alliance, you see all these new things with AI and of course, also new messaging channels, but the video, and we had some financial stuff in the past, and not all of that. I think the Robert Gallup, one of the judges of the last challenge, wrote a nice blog about that. When you look at them individually, I mean, it's not rocket science or totally new, but it's just the ease with which these things can now be built and integrated. And it's getting easier and easier with low code and no code solutions. We're getting to the point, it feels, that telcos, but also other ISVs and integrators are building new stuff, new things, new solutions on top of CPaaS, and that's going to lead to that huge increment in the total market.
Right. Just a point there, Rob. I think we talked about use cases as driving those revenue numbers, but to the point you just made, where it's easier to consume these services, which I think opens up to what Raul's calling the 3.0 around SME, small business. I think before you had to be a developer to consume any of this, where moving forward with low code, no code, even some turnkey applications, it's really expanding, beyond the large enterprise. So Raul, I'm really interested in understanding you've done a lot of research on the SME space. How do you see that growing and impacting those numbers moving forward as well?
Yeah, so SMEs, that's a segment that we think has great potential. There's a significant pent-up demand. What we have seen is that SMEs, they have typically been the late adopters in terms of digital transformation. The chart that you see right now on the screen shows kind of the way digital transformation evolved for SMEs and large organizations before and after the pandemic. So what we see is that even though SMEs significantly lag in terms of execution or deployment or initiatives in production when it comes to digital transformation compared to the larger organizations. We do see that with the pandemic, there was a significant acceleration on the side of SMEs. So if we had expected before the pandemic that the normal adoption rate for SMEs, the pickup for digital transformation may have been, let's say, 3 to 6 years, what we saw was a compression where the timeline was significantly reduced, and SMEs have significantly picked up the pace. So we see them now in stages, either in proof of concept or analysis. That means there is a significant backlog or pent-up demand for this technology on the side of SMEs. The question is, who's going to address that opportunity? It's not an easy segment to address. it's very fragmented, and it requires it has very specific requirements in terms of how you address not just the technical but also the commercial issues. But that's a significant opportunity that we see for CPaaS.
That's a whole new market that's opening up, right? And not only, I mean, we talked about low code, no code, and how it's easier to develop such applications. But then, of course, the other part is how do you bring it to market? And I guess that's also where the telcos and the CSP and channel partners in general can play a huge role to get to those smaller companies, right?
Yeah, and actually, for CSPs, what I could say is that there's already, I think the heavy lifting has already been done in some way, because if you think about how, for example, small businesses, think about the local pizza shop and all those food businesses that all of a sudden had to jump into deliveries with Uber Eats, DoorDash. They are already within a digital environment. They already have deployed a digital experience. However, it is a segment that is still evolving. And if you think about the margins, CSPs have a significant opportunity to disintermediate these businesses from the Uber Eats and DoorDash and help create more healthy opportunities in terms of margins for these vendors. Interestingly, that mirrors precisely what's happening with CSPs and CPaaS. If they disintermediate and move up the value chain to provide these embedded communications services directly, that will put them in a much better position.
Kevin, I know one of the members of the CPaaS Acceleration Alliance is Radio, who's into this low code, no code. Can you add something to this conversation about that?
Yeah. I think the low code, no code is critical, right? In the fact that if I'm a small business, which I am right now, I don't have an IT group, right? And so having access to tools that impact my business that I don't have to develop or use APIs directly really simplifies things for me as a business. And so I think Bradio is a good example where they have, kind of this drag and drop capability to onboard a small business that, immediately ties you into messaging, all types of omni-channel opportunities. I think we're already seeing the opportunity to build out very vertical related applications on top of that are even more turnkey and focused more on a business. And, talked a little bit about Uber Eats and so forth. I look at the opportunity globally. I look at a country like Indonesia as an example where it's probably 95% small businesses. And as consumers, I spent some time in Bali, just pre-pandemic, and didn't obviously speak the local language, but I could use Uber Eats or Gojek or one of the delivery and get any meal I wanted to. And so I think as consumers, even in these international markets, we're ready. We're digitally there. And so the opportunity for a mobile operator to step in and provide these capabilities, because all the small businesses all their telephone services, data services are coming from the mobile operator. And so to be able to bring in, this type of a platform seems like a no-brainer to me. And the opportunity and the size of the market is tremendous. And so I'm super bullish. I think too often we focus more on the US market and the growth opportunity here, and it's a very sophisticated market. But as we look overseas, the consumer's ready, I think now it's up to the mobile operators or the entrepreneurs out there to figure out, how do I bridge that gap? Because that market is huge. It's tremendous.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we'll soon have a session where we talk more about the CPaaS enablers and the role of the telcos and how that dynamic plays out and what we can expect there. And we'll have Raul there again because he did some great research in that part as well. We're coming to the end of this session, gentlemen, and I would like to this is the time of year where Mobile World Congress is in the air, right? It's happening. It's the biggest event in mobile space, and we just talked about it a little bit how important the mobile operators are becoming in this space. So I'm just curious, where do you think the big mobile, what the direction for the mobile operators is with 5G coming up over the next 5 years? People start to talk about standalone 5G. Some predictions. What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of months in that space? Raul, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the conversation has been, thinking about the previous years at Mobile World Congress, where 5G started becoming more and more prominent around 2017 and so on. It was about the deployment and who are the players and so on. Now that we are in a different phase, I think the big question for mobile operators is the monetization of those investments that they have made. That's actually where I see CPaaS playing a significant role, because it can open up significant opportunities for them to really monetize, find new ways to monetize all of these investments they have made and are making with 5G.
Kevin, some thoughts from you about that?
Yeah, I think I'd break it into maybe 3 more short-term areas. Clearly, they need to monetize these investments that they've made, and there will be, I think, a lot of things that are really interesting a year from now around 5G, IoT, and how those get integrated. But in the near term, I think the opportunity for a mobile operator is to initially win back the A2P business. They kind of let that go to the aggregators, and so I think that's a straightforward way for them to use a CPaaS platform and really look at customer engagement as the focus. Not so much CPaaS. CPaaS is the technology that enables it, but how can they help their business customers really engage with their consumers is critical. So I think playing a bigger role in taking back the A2P business, which then transitions to P2A, which is an area that we're just starting to touch on. You see QR codes everywhere now, and so there's a natural way to use the mobile network, your cell phone, your mobile, and interact with the brand. And so CPaaS is going to be a core technology to enable that. And then I think what's really interesting for mobile operators is omni-channel, right? Because up until now, WhatsApp, for example, all the other OTTs, they've taken business away on the messaging side from the carriers. But by embracing CPaaS, you now can bring the competitor in-house, so to speak, and offer services across Viber, WhatsApp, Line, Facebook, all these different types of channels, and monetize that. And in the process, really help your customers engage with their consumers where they're at, which I think is absolutely critical in the customer engagement, is you've got to meet the consumer where they're at. And so to think that a mobile operator could actually make money off of what's been their competitor for the last decade, I think is really intriguing to me, in something that's fairly straightforward now with the technology that's available. And so I also see that as a really interesting growth opportunity for operators as they look into the future this year.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. So what I find interesting right now is the growth of the role that the hyperscalers are playing, right? The big guys. It used to be CPaaS, used to be startups and scale ups, and now it's the big guys. It's Microsoft, it's AWS, it's Ericsson with their network approach, Rakuten, what they're doing there with the launch of their CPaaS. And the telcos that are ahead of the curve, let's say, and already active, like E&, and Deutsche Telekom, and a couple more. I think it's going to be really exciting to see how that all works out, how they all play together. So the cloudification of the mobile networks, right, at the same time as the value adds that we're discussing here. It's a whole new ball game, I think. And I remember 2 years ago, Cloud City at Mobile World. That was the Mobile World that was almost empty, right? Only 3 or 4 halls because of COVID. That Cloud City thing was, in a way, was a start of for me, it was a start of a new generation Mobile World. It's much more about these innovations. So I think it's very interesting to see what happens. Thank you for being here, Raul and Kevin, also, of course, but we've seen you quite a few times already. So I'm especially excited that Raul was here to explain about the, let's say, the trends and the forecast. And I look forward to the session in a couple of weeks where we look more at the enablers and the role of the telcos, and also the strategies for telcos that might work and might not work. So thanks a lot, gentlemen, and look forward to the next session.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Good to see you, Raul.